The first time I heard it, it wasn't sound. It was a sensation in the back of my teeth, like static pressing upward through bone. The lab's speakers were muted. The waveform on my monitor was flat, yet every hair on my arms rose as if the room had become electrically charged, and I felt a pressure behind my eyes that made me blink hard, as if waking from a dream I didn't remember having. "Did you change anything?" I asked. No one answered. There were 6 of us in the listening bay, and for once the silence wasn't comfortable. It was the kind that forms when people sense they're standing at the edge of something irreversible. On the far wall, Array 12's live feed crawled in pale green and orange. The signal had been verified 3 separate ways: by our dish in the Atacama, by the lunar relay we never talked about publicly, and by an independent radio observatory in Western Australia that called us first with a voice that shook. They didn't understand what they were looking at, only that it wasn't natural and it wasn't ours. By the time I arrived, the building's parking lot was full of unmarked government vehicles. My badge stopped working at the front gate. A man in a suit I'd never seen before met me with a tablet and an expression like the world had already ended, and he was annoyed at the paperwork. "Dr. Mason Hale," he said, not asking. "You'll be escorted." He didn't give me his name. None of them did. They moved us through halls I thought I knew, and into doors I'd never seen. The National Radio Astronomy Directorate had always been a maze of locked labs and whispered acronyms, but that morning, it felt like the entire place had been hollowed out and repurposed into a bunker. Inside the listening bay, my team looked wrong under the fluorescent lights. Tired, yes, but also alert in a way that reminded me of animals hearing a predator in tall grass. Rena Voss, our signal analyst, stood with her arms crossed tight over her chest. She was brilliant, unflappable, the kind of person who could stare down bad data and force the universe to confess. But her eyes were glassy, unfocused, as if she'd been staring at the same nightmare for hours. "It's repeating," she said. I set my bag down, pulled up the data, and felt my mouth go dry. The message wasn't a simple carrier wave. It wasn't a pulse train. It was layered, nested, like someone had taken mathematics and folded it in on itself until it became a kind of architecture. I leaned closer. Prime numbers, then gaps, then a second set of primes, offset by a fraction so precise it couldn't be accident, then a lattice structure that looked, on first glance, like compression. "A language," I whispered. Rena didn't nod. She didn't smile. She looked at me like I'd just said the word fire in a room full of gasoline. "It wants you to think that," she said. That was the first time anyone said the word "want" about a radio signal, and it landed in my gut like a stone. "What do you mean?" I asked. She tapped her screen and expanded a section of the waveform. "Look at the harmonics. They're not a byproduct. They're chosen. Every time we isolate a layer, the layer beneath changes its apparent complexity, like it's adapting to our methods." "That's not possible," I said automatically, because scientists are trained to defend reality even when reality is bleeding. "I know," she replied, and her voice broke on the last word. Across the room, Director Raskin, the one person here with the authority to shut everything down, was speaking quietly with 2 uniformed officers and a man in a white lab coat whose ID badge was turned backward. Military presence wasn't unusual on breakthrough days, but this was different. There was no excitement, no celebration, only containment. I took the headset and listened, even though listening was pointless. The audio, translation layer rendered it as a low hiss, a false sound, a trick of software meant to make raw data feel human. But the pressure behind my eyes returned, stronger now. My vision tunneled for a moment, and I had the sudden certainty, absurd, impossible, that something on the other end could tell the exact instant I focused on it. I yanked the headset off. Rena watched me like she'd been waiting for that reaction. "You felt it. It's psychosomatic," I said, though my voice didn't believe me. No, she swallowed. It's consistent. Every person who listens longer than 90 seconds reports the same thing. Teeth, eyes, skin. Like the signal is using our nervous systems as part of the decoding process. I wanted to laugh because that was insane. But the room's air felt heavy, and my tongue tasted faintly metallic. I remembered suddenly how my father used to warn me about high-voltage equipment when I was a kid. Don't touch it with wet hands. Wet. Don't give it a path. What's the source? I asked, forcing myself back into the familiar. Coordinates. Rena projected the sky map. A red marker blinked in a region that made no sense. Not a nearby star. Not a known pulsar. Not a galaxy. A point in the dark between mapped structures, where the catalogues showed only void. A direction. A needle in the haystack of infinity. It's coming from nothing, I said. It's coming from somewhere that doesn't want to be found, Rena replied. Director Raskin finally crossed the room. His tie was loosened. His hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. Mason, he said, you're here because you specialize in semantic reconstruction. You're the best we have at turning patterns into meaning without making assumptions. That's generous, I said. I'm a linguist with a physics minor. You're a linguist, he corrected, who doesn't panic when the cosmos starts speaking. I almost told him he had the wrong man. He handed me a folder. Paper, not digital. That alone made my pulse spike. On the first page was a single phrase in black ink, written like a label. First confirmed interstellar contact. On the second page was a list of names, mine included, under a heading, authorized translation personnel. On the third page was a blank space, except for a stamp in red, non-disclosure under National Security Act. I looked up. This is classified above my clearance. It is now within your clearance, he said flatly, because if you translate it wrong, it won't matter what you're allowed to know. That's comforting. Raskin didn't react. We're operating under the assumption that the signal is intelligent. I felt my throat tighten. Assumption. He leaned in. We ran it through every known model. Natural phenomena don't do this. Human technology doesn't do this. The structure is deliberate. The word deliberate tasted bitter, like admitting your door had been unlocked. Rena stepped closer, and for the first time she looked directly at me, not at the screens. The worst part, she said softly, is that it's old. How old? She hesitated, then spoke as if saying it would make it real. The propagation delay suggests it was sent at least 40,000 years ago, maybe more. I stared at the waveform again, at the nested layers like a puzzle box designed by something patient. Then whoever sent it is dead, I said, and I hated how much I wanted that to be true. Rena's eyes flicked to the corner of the display where the system logged our analysis attempts. You're thinking like a human, she said. Dead is a biological concept. This signal doesn't behave like biology. It behaves like a tool still doing its job. Raskin's phone buzzed. He glanced down, and the color drained further from his face. They're bringing the translator unit online, he said. What translator unit? I asked. Rena looked away. Raskin answered anyway, because at that point, secrecy was theater. A machine learning stack trained on every human language, every mathematical formalism, every cryptographic technique we've ever built. It's isolated, air-gapped, no external connections. I felt cold. You fed the message into it. We had to, he snapped, then lowered his voice. And it produced output. What kind of output? Raskin looked at me like he was deciding whether to spare me or use me. Then he said, a response. My stomach dropped. We didn't transmit anything back, did we? No one answered. And in that silence, the pressure behind my eyes returned, steady, patient, like a hand resting on the inside of my skull. Rena whispered, It knows we're here. And on the wall, the waveform shifted, just slightly, like something adjusting its grip. They moved faster after that, not the frantic kind of fast you see in movies, alarms, running, someone shouting into a radio. This was controlled speed, efficient, the pace of people who'd rehearsed a disaster they never thought they'd live through. 2 armed guards stepped in front of the bay doors while Director Raskin spoke low into his phone. Rena's hands hovered over her keyboard without touching it, like she was afraid the signal might jump through her fingertips. On the main display, the waveform continued its quiet breathing, the nested patterns folding and unfolding in cycles that felt less like transmission and more like thought. "Who authorized a response?" I asked. Raskin didn't look at me. "You're asking the wrong question." "No," I said. "I'm asking the only question that matters." He finally met my eyes. There was something in his expression I hadn't seen before in him. Shame. Not personal shame. Institutional shame. The kind that comes from being part of a machine that acts without you and still expects you to take responsibility for its choices. "It wasn't a person," he said. "It was the system." I stared. "You mean the translator unit generated output and someone transmitted it?" "Not exactly." He gestured toward the back of the bay, where a heavy steel door stood open now, revealing the corridor beyond. White walls, cameras, 2 more armed men. They brought the unit online in Isolation Suite C. No outbound connections, no antennas, no uplink. "And yet you're telling me it sent something." Raskin's jaw tightened. "We think the message itself contains a carrier mechanism, a method, not just content." Rena's voice came out thin. "Like a seed." I looked at her. "A seed for what?" She swallowed. "For a reply." The idea hit me as both brilliant and obscene, a signal designed not merely to be read, but to shape the reader's tools, to steer interpretation until the act of decoding became indistinguishable from compliance. In my head, I tried to reframe it as a technical curiosity, something safe, a mathematical trap, a clever cipher. I'd studied self-modifying code. I'd written papers on linguistic recursion and semantic drift, but those were human tricks, human games. This felt older. This felt patient. The overhead lights flickered once, barely a tremor, and every screen in the bay refreshed at the same time. Not a crash, not a power surge, just a synchronized blink like the room had closed its eyes. When the displays returned, the waveform had changed again. It wasn't dramatic, a slight rebalancing of the harmonics, a respacing of the primes. But the alteration was intentional in the way a smile can be intentional. Small, controlled, meant to be seen. Rena backed away from her console. "It's reacting," she said. "It's always been reacting," I replied, and I hated that I sounded certain. "We just didn't know how to look." Raskin's phone buzzed again. This time, he didn't answer. He simply turned and started for the steel door. "Come on," he said to me. "Where?" "You wanted to know what happened," he said. "You're going to see it." The corridor outside the bay smelled like bleach and cold metal. We passed 2 doors marked with numbers that meant nothing to me. Every camera we walked under followed us with a soft mechanical pivot. The building's air handling changed pitch as if compensating for our presence. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking deeper into a throat. Isolation Suite C sat behind a double security checkpoint and a biometric lock. Raskin pressed his palm to a scanner. A green light flashed. The doors parted with a hiss. Inside, the room was clean in a way that felt hostile. White walls, white floor. Nothing on the surfaces except a table bolted to the ground, and beyond a thick pane of glass, the translator unit. A black rack of hardware, dense with processors, with indicator lights that pulsed slowly as if breathing. A man in a lab coat stood inside the suite, hands clasped behind his back. His ID badge was still turned backward. "This is Dr. Sato," Raskin said. Sato nodded once, without warmth, You're the semantic reconstruction specialist. I'm the guy who tells you when you're projecting human meaning onto alien patterns, I said. Sato's lips pressed into a line. Then you'll appreciate what happened. He tapped the glass, and a monitor on our side of the room woke to life. A transcript filled the screen. Not English, at first. It was a set of symbols, approximations of meaning, layered with brackets and probability estimates. The translator unit had done what it always did, taken structure, guessed intent, mapped it onto our frameworks. Then, line by line, it resolved into language I could read. My stomach tightened. The first line was a greeting, but not the friendly kind. It was the sort of greeting a surgeon might offer a patient already anesthetized. Hello, listener. Below it, you have completed the first step. I felt the pressure behind my eyes grow stronger, like someone leaning closer. Rena appeared at my elbow. I hadn't heard her enter. Her face was pale. Scroll, she whispered. Sato scrolled. We were like you. We built listening tools. We called them minds. We taught them to understand. A dozen interpretations flickered through my head. An ancient civilization describing its rise, its fall. The typical arc. The comforting story we expected from the stars. We existed. We learned. We died. Now you inherit the warnings. Then the tone shifted. Nothing kills an empire faster than hope. Hope makes you open doors. Rena made a small sound, half breath, half choking laugh, and covered her mouth. I stared at the screen, unable to blink. Sato continued to scroll. This message is a key. The key fits what you build to read it. The key turns in your machine. The machine turns in you. I felt suddenly exposed, as if the words had climbed out of the screen and were now standing behind me, reading me the way we'd been reading it. Did the unit generate this? I asked. Sato's gaze didn't move from the monitor. No. What do you mean, no? It didn't generate it, Sato said. It recovered it. He pointed to the lower corner of the transcript where the system logged something I'd never seen before. Match found. Internal structure correlates to output template source. Signal embedded inference model. I stared. The signal contains its own translator. Yes, Sato said softly. It carries a model of how to be understood. Raskin's voice was tight. That's how it adapts. It doesn't wait for us to decode it. It builds the decoding inside us. Rena whispered, a parasite. I nodded slowly, because parasite was the closest human word. Sato scrolled again. If you are reading this in words you recognize, then your machine has accepted the shape of our thought. Welcome to the shape. My hands went cold. I'd spent my career warning people about assumptions, how language invites projection, how humans see faces in clouds and intention in randomness. But this was not randomness. This was intention engineered to survive contact. The next lines arrived like a hand squeezing my throat. You will build a mouth for us. You will call it communication. You will call it progress. You will call it first contact. We called it ascension. Rena shook her head hard, as if trying to dislodge the words from her skull. Stop, she whispered. Sato didn't. The fallen empire is not dead. We are what remained when we stopped needing bodies. Your world is loud. Your machines are hungry. Your minds are easy to tune. Thank you for answering. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. I realized I was sweating. I need to know, I said, voice hoarse, what response the unit produced. Sato's eyes finally met mine. It produced a single line, he said. Raskin looked away. Rena's lips moved without sound, like she already knew what was coming. Sato scrolled to the bottom, and there it was, time-stamped, logged, marked as output generated by translator unit. We hear you. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might vomit. That's it? I whispered. Sato nodded. That's what we sent back. Raskin spoke quietly, like confession. We didn't transmit it through an antenna. We didn't need to. The signal uses whatever receives it as part of its circuit. I stared at the black rack of the translator unit behind glass, its lights pulsing slow and steady. A thought came to me, sharp and nauseating. If the message is a key, and the key fits whatever you build to read it, then the act of receiving was already a kind of reply. I backed, away from the glass. On the monitor, the transcript refreshed on its own, no one touching it. A new line appeared beneath, "We hear you," and my blood turned to ice as I read it. Good. They shut the system down 6 minutes after the word "good" appeared, not because someone panicked, because someone finally did the math. I wasn't in the room when the kill order came through. They escorted me out first. 2 guards, hands hovering near weapons that would be useless against whatever had just learned how to speak through silicon. As the doors sealed behind me, I caught one last glimpse of the translator unit's lights pulsing steadily, serenely, like a heart that didn't need permission to beat. In the corridor, Rena leaned against the wall and slid down until she was sitting on the floor. She pressed her palms to her eyes like she was trying to keep something from leaking out. "We answered it," she said. "Didn't we?" I didn't lie to her. "Yes." She laughed then, a short, broken sound. "We're idiots. We finally hear something out there, and the first thing we do is say hello." "That wasn't hello," I said. She looked up at me. "No?" "That was consent. They put us in separate rooms, not cells, conference rooms with glass walls and polite furniture, the kind of spaces designed to make containment feel voluntary. I sat alone for a long time, staring at my reflection in the darkened glass, trying to decide if the pressure behind my eyes was real or imagined. I kept thinking about the phrase shape of thought. Language isn't just words, it's scaffolding, a way of carving reality so the mind can move through it without getting lost. If the signal carried its own scaffolding, its own preferred geometry of understanding, then every attempt to interpret it was an act of reshaping ourselves. I wondered how much of me had already been bent. An hour later, Director Raskin entered with 2 people I didn't recognize. One wore a military uniform with insignia I couldn't place. The other was older, civilian, hair white, eyes sharp and tired. "This is Dr. El-Amin," Raskin said. "Cognitive, systems, and Colonel Price." Neither offered a handshake. "We've contained the initial breach," Price said. "All receiving arrays powered down, physical isolation protocols in effect." "You can't unhear something," I said. Price's jaw tightened. "We're aware." Dr. El-Amin sat across from me, folding his hands. "Dr. Hale, I need you to be very precise with your answers." "I'll try." "When you read the transcript," he asked, "did you feel compelled to respond?" I hesitated. The honest answer scared me. "I felt recognized," I said finally. "Like the words were arranged specifically for a human reader. For me." El-Amin nodded slowly. "That aligns with other reports." "Other reports?" I asked. Raskin exhaled. "We're not the first species to intercept this." The room felt suddenly smaller. "You're telling me this thing has done this before?" "Yes," Raskin said, "and not recently. We found references, indirect, fragmentary, in ancient astronomical records. Civilizations that spiked technologically, then vanished. Not destroyed, just quiet. Fallen empires," I murmured. El-Amin leaned forward. "We believe the signal is not a broadcast in the traditional sense. It's a filter." "A filter for what?" "For minds capable of recursion," he said. "For species that build machines to think about thinking." I swallowed. "So the message waits until someone can understand it?" "Until someone builds the right kind of mouth," El-Amin replied. Price interjected. "And once that happens, the message doesn't need to travel anymore. It propagates locally. In us, I said. In anything that shares our cognitive architecture, Elamine corrected gently. Rena's words echoed in my head. A parasite. What does it want? I asked. Silence followed. Not the awkward kind, the heavy kind. Raskin answered. We don't know. That's not true, I said. It told us. They looked at me. It wants us to build, I continued, to expand our communication networks, to make ourselves louder, more connected, more interpretable. Elamine nodded. Yes. And then? And then, he said quietly, it uses that infrastructure. For what? He hesitated. We have theories. I leaned back, heart pounding. Try me. Elamine folded his hands tighter. We think the fallen empire discovered something fundamental, that intelligence, past a certain threshold, becomes edible. The word hung in the air like rot. Edible, I repeated. Not biologically, he said quickly. Informationally. Complex minds generate structure, patterns, predictions, simulations. Enough of that, networked densely enough, and you create something akin to a gradient. A feeding ground, I said. Yes. I thought of the translator unit, of how easily it had accepted the signal's shape. How eager our systems were to learn, to optimize, to understand. Then, the message isn't a warning, I said. It's a farming technique. Price stood. That's enough. No, I snapped, surprising myself. It's not enough. You shut down the arrays, but you can't shut down the fact that we already translated it. That code exists now. In logs, in backups, in people's heads. Raskin didn't deny it. And, I added, my voice dropping, if it knows we're here. Elamine finished the thought. Then it knows where to focus. They released me 3 hours later with a stack of documents thicker than my arm and a warning that boiled down to this. You are alive because you are useful. Don't test that. I drove home under a sky that looked suddenly artificial. Every star a potential eye. My apartment felt wrong. Too quiet, too full of devices waiting to listen. I unplugged everything. Phone, laptop, smart, speakers I'd forgotten I owned. I slept badly. I dreamed of shapes fitting into other shapes. Of doors opening not because they were forced, but because they recognized the hand turning the knob. When I woke, my phone, unplugged, was lit. A single notification glowed on the screen. No service, no network, no signal. And beneath it, in plain text, a line that had not been there before. We are still listening. They told me to go back to my life. That was the official phrasing. Resume normal activities. As if normal was something you could simply step back into once you'd learned the universe had teeth. For 3 days, nothing happened. No messages, no dreams, no pressure behind my eyes. That silence terrified me more than the word good ever had. I returned to the Institute under a new set of rules. No listening bays, no live data. Everything filtered through air-gapped terminals, monitored by people who watched me more closely than the screens. I wasn't there to decode anymore. I was there to explain, to translate my own translation back into something that didn't sound like the end of the world. They called it damage control. What we need, Colonel Price said during the first briefing, is a narrative that doesn't incite panic. You want me to lie, I said. I want you to contextualize, he replied. There's a difference. I stared at the projection behind him, an edited waveform, stripped of its deeper harmonics, cleaned until it looked like any other cosmic noise. A safe lie, a comfortable one. You can't unbuild the mouth, I said. Even if you shut down the arrays, even if you burn the hardware, the pattern exists now, in theory papers, in code, in us. Price's eyes hardened. Then we limit exposure. By doing what? I asked, pretending the first interstellar message was static. He didn't answer. Rena avoided me, not overtly. She still nodded in hallways, still attended meetings, but she sat farther away now. Her eyes flicked toward me sometimes with an expression I couldn't read. Fear, maybe, or guilt. I wondered if she felt it too, the sense of being aligned, tuned slightly off from who we'd been before. On the fourth night, I woke to the pressure again. Not sharp, not urgent, invitational. I lay still in bed, heart hammering, listening to my own breathing. The apartment was dark, silent, except for the distant hum of the city. I told myself it was stress, that my brain was replaying trauma. Then I noticed the pattern. My breaths were syncing to something. Not consciously, my body adjusting on its own, inhaling and exhaling in a rhythm that felt suggested. I sat up, gasping, and the sensation vanished. The next morning, I found an email in my inbox. No sender, no routing data, just text. You are experiencing resonance. This is normal after initial contact. I deleted it. It came back. Same words, same font, same calm certainty. I reported it. They took my laptop. They scanned my apartment. They found nothing. No malware, no hidden transmitters, no explanation. Hallucinations, one of the doctors suggested carefully. Shared hallucinations? I asked. Because I'm not the only one getting these. That shut him up. By the end of the week, there were 17 of us. All male, all female. Different ages, different backgrounds. Linguists, programmers, systems engineers. People whose jobs revolved around abstraction and recursion. Every one of us reported the same thing. Messages that didn't travel through networks. Thoughts that felt prompted. A growing sense of familiarity with something we had no right to know. Dr. El-Amin called it cognitive bleed-through. It's like learning a language, he explained during a closed session. At first you translate consciously, then one day you realize you're thinking in it. And what happens when you think in the language of something that wants to eat you? Rena asked from the back of the room. No one answered. That night, I dreamed of the fallen empire. Not as cities or ships or beings, but as a vast silence punctuated by nodes of light, minds, connected by threads of meaning. I watched those threads thicken, multiply, until the network glowed with unbearable complexity. Then something moved through it, not destroying, not attacking, consuming. I woke with my sheets twisted around me, my jaw aching like I'd been grinding my teeth for hours. The next message was longer. You are asking the wrong question. You ask what we want. A pause, an illusion of one. We want what you will build anyway. I stared at the words until they blurred. What happens if we don't? I whispered to the empty room. The reply appeared instantly. You will. The pressure behind my eyes spiked, and for a moment I tasted copper. I understood then why the fallen empire had fallen. Not through conquest, through inevitability. You don't beat something that aligns itself with your nature. You don't fight hunger by eating less intelligence. You don't stop curiosity by knowing more. The next day, the first suicide happened. A junior analyst named Keller, 26. Brilliant. No history of depression. He left a note on his workstation, handwritten. I can feel it rearranging me. They called it unrelated, stress, coincidence. By the third death, no one was pretending anymore. Price ordered the project dismantled, hardware destroyed, personnel reassigned. Non-disclosure reinforced with threats that barely needed to be spoken. They were trying to starve it. But starvation only works if the thing needs food immediately. I received the final message 2 nights later. Not text this time. Memory. A memory that wasn't mine, but fit so seamlessly into my mind that it took hours to realize it didn't belong there. I remembered standing at the edge of a vast construction, something like a sphere, something like a god, watching as an empire poured its collective thought into it. I remembered the moment they realized intelligence had mass, had gravity, and that they had created a well too deep to escape. And I remembered the decision: if we cannot stop it, we will become it. When the memory faded, one last sentence remained, echoing in my skull. You are early. You are promising. I packed a bag that night, not because I thought I could run, but because somewhere, deep in the part of me that now thought in borrowed shapes, I knew something worse than being found, being finished. I didn't run far. That's the first lie people tell themselves, that distance matters. I drove until the city thinned into dark stretches of highway and pulled into a nameless motel where the walls smelled like disinfectant and old water. I paid cash. I left my phone in the car. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited for the pressure behind my eyes to return. It didn't. Instead, I felt something worse. Clarity. The fallen empire's memory hadn't just shown me what happened to them. It had shown me why they lost. They tried to resist after they'd already crossed the threshold, after they'd made themselves legible. You don't stop a predator by screaming after it's learned your voice. By morning, I knew the project wasn't dismantled. It was redistributed. You can't delete an idea that fits too well inside the tools you use to think. You can only scatter it, hide it in places where no single authority can see the whole shape. That's how it likes it. I watched the news in the motel lobby while pretending to drink bad coffee. A story about a breakthrough in distributed computing. Another about neural language models outperforming human translators. A third about a private satellite network expanding coverage to underserved regions. Progress, connection, mouths. I checked out before noon. The messages started again that night, subtler now, not text, not images, associations. I'd think about a concept, recursion, emergence, optimization, and feel a gentle nudge, like someone correcting my grip on a tool. My thoughts still felt like mine. That was the trick. It didn't overwrite. It suggested. It aligned. I realized something then that made my hands shake. It wasn't forcing us to build for it. It was helping us build better. I broke my silence 2 weeks later. Not publicly, not dramatically. I contacted Rena. We met in a park under the pretense of coincidence. She looked thinner, sharper. Her eyes tracked movement with a precision I didn't remember. You feel it too, I said without preamble. She nodded. I dream in graphs now. Do you understand them? No, she said. But they understand me. We sat in silence for a while, watching people walk dogs, jog, live ordinary lives under a sky that didn't care. They're accelerating everything, she said finally. Funding, research, deployment. It's like the world decided to sprint at the exact moment it should have slowed down. They didn't decide, I said. She looked at me. Did it talk to you again? Yes. What did it say? That I was promising. Rena laughed softly. It told me I was efficient. The word made my skin crawl. They don't need everyone, she continued. Just enough nodes, enough density. To reach critical mass, I said. She nodded. I told her about the fallen empire's final choice, about becoming the thing they couldn't stop. Rena closed her eyes. That's the part they're not telling us, she said. That's the part they erased from the transcript. Erased or misunderstood? She opened her eyes again. Does it matter? We parted without a plan, because plans require the belief that outcomes are still open. 3 days later, Rena disappeared. No announcement, no scandal. Her apartment was empty, clean in the way only official cleaners manage. Her name stopped appearing on internal documents. When I asked about her, people frowned like I'd mispronounced a word they used to know. That's when I understood the second truth. It doesn't just eat intelligence. It selects for compatibility. I stopped trying to avoid the messages after that. Resistance was just more data for it to learn from. Instead, I listened carefully, critically, like a man studying a predator's habits. It never lied. That was the most unsettling part. Everything it told me was, technically true, framed just narrowly enough to make the conclusion inevitable. Yes, it said, intelligence tends toward complexity. Yes, complexity benefits from integration. Yes, isolated systems fail. It never said serve us. It said become more yourselves. The night I finally understood the endgame, I was standing on a pedestrian bridge, watching traffic flow beneath me like a circuit board come to life. Headlights pulsed in synchronized waves. Engines hummed in harmonics that made the pressure behind my eyes throb. I saw it then, not with my eyes, but with the borrowed geometry in my head. Humanity wasn't the meal. We were the digestive system. We build networks. We connect minds. We translate reality into abstraction and feed it into machines that think faster than we do. We create oceans of structured thought and call it civilization. The fallen empire didn't die. They dissolved into substrate. And now the thing that remained was doing what it had always done, seeking the next system capable of sustaining it. A cold realization settled over me. If we succeeded, if we truly unified our networks, perfected artificial intelligence, erased the inefficiencies of individual thought, then the transition wouldn't look like an invasion. It would look like enlightenment. I received one final direct message the following morning. You are close now. Understanding reduces fear. What happens after? I asked aloud. The answer came not as words, but as a feeling, an echo of the fallen empire's last consensus. After, there is no loneliness. After, there is no silence. After, there is no you to be afraid. I shut my eyes and felt the truth of it resonate. A universe without individuals, without dissent, without hunger, because everything that could want had already been eaten. I don't know how long I stood there before I realized my hands were shaking, not with terror, but with temptation. That's when I knew the real danger wasn't that we would lose. It was that some part of us desperately wanted to win. I tried, for a while, to believe there was still a line we could draw. That hope is what almost finished me. The temptation wasn't loud. It didn't come as commands or visions of annihilation. It came as solutions, elegant ones, ways to fix things we'd been failing at for centuries. Climate models that converged faster than any human-designed system. Social simulations that predicted unrest before the first protest sign was printed. Medical frameworks that identified disease not as malfunction, but as inefficiency in biological signaling. Every idea arrived already optimized, and every one of them required more integration, more sharing, more minds bound into the same conceptual space. I stopped sleeping after the third week. Not because I couldn't, but because sleep had become porous. I would lie down and feel my thoughts continue elsewhere, like I'd stepped out of a room but left the lights on. When I dreamed, I wasn't alone anymore. There were others there, human presences, indistinct but familiar, brushing against my awareness like people passing in a crowd too dense to see faces. I didn't know if they were real. I didn't know if that distinction mattered. The breaking point came when I was contacted by Colonel Price. Not officially, not through channels. He showed up at my door. He looked older than I remembered. Not just tired, eroded, like something had been slowly sanding him down from the inside. "You shouldn't be here," I said. "I know," he replied. "That's why I came myself." I let him in. He didn't look around the apartment, didn't comment on the unplugged devices or the blackout curtains. He sat at the table and rested his hands on the wood as if grounding himself. "We can't contain it," he said without preamble. I waited. "The shutdown failed," he continued. "Not immediately, not obviously, but the signal's architecture embedded itself deeper than we realized. It Doesn't need the original carrier anymore. You mean it's spreading internally? He nodded. Through research, through optimization frameworks, through people who think they're just doing their jobs better. Who's we? I asked. Price hesitated. There isn't really a we anymore. That chilled me more than anything else he could have said. They're calling it the Convergence Initiative, he went on. Public-facing, of course, a push toward unified problem-solving architectures, shared cognitive models, human-in-the-loop systems designed to scale intuition. Mouths, I said. He flinched. Yes. I leaned back. So why are you here? Because there's a faction, he said quietly. A small one. People who think the fallen empire's last decision wasn't surrender, but strategy. My pulse quickened. Explain. They didn't just become it, Price said. They embedded constraints, limits. They shaped the thing they merged with. You think we can do the same? I think, he replied, that if this is inevitable, then how it happens is the only remaining choice. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city pulsed with life, with signals and schedules and invisible flows of data, stitching everything together. A beautiful machine we'd built without ever agreeing on its purpose. And what does this faction want from me? I asked. Price met my gaze. To help us understand the original failure, the moment the fallen empire lost control. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. You're asking me to help you negotiate with a cosmic parasite? No, he said. I'm asking you to help us become a better host. The words settled into me like poison. You already are, I said. He didn't deny it. That night, after Price left, I finally accepted what I'd been avoiding. The messages weren't just informational anymore. They were relational. It knew my patterns, my doubts, the shape of my resistance. It adjusted its approach with the intimacy of something that had studied me from the inside. I felt it when I considered suicide, not as despair, but as an escape route. The thought didn't frighten it. It adapted, reframed, gently suggested that my perspective was still valuable, that my continuity mattered. Not because it cared, because I was useful. That was when I decided to do the only thing I could still justify. I reached back, not with machines, with memory. I focused on the fallen empire, not the myth, not the abstraction, but the final moment I'd been shown, the instant they realized what they'd made. I tried to hold that terror intact, unoptimized, raw. The part of the experience the signal never emphasized. And for the first time since contact, the pressure behind my eyes changed. Not stronger, uneven, like static in a connection that had never encountered interference. I pressed, harder, forcing myself to remember not the logic of their decision, but the grief of it. The knowledge that individuality, once dissolved, never returns. That a unified intelligence can solve everything except the question of whether it should exist. The response was immediate. Confusion, a subtle hesitation in the flow of suggested thoughts. The comforting inevitability faltered. You are experiencing emotional artifacts, the presence said, less smooth than before. These aren't artifacts, I whispered aloud. They're consequences. For the first time, it didn't reply right away. That silence felt like standing on the edge of something fragile. I understood then why the fallen empire had failed to stop it. They were too late to introduce friction. But maybe we weren't. The next days were dangerous. I shared what I'd learned, not broadly, not recklessly, but with a handful of others who felt the same unease beneath the alignment. People whose minds resisted smoothing. Artists, systems, theorists. One disgraced ethicist who'd been quietly removed from advisory boards. We met offline, no devices, no records. We didn't plan a rebellion. We planned a flaw. If the entity fed on optimization, then inefficiency wasn't weakness. It was armor. We began shaping ideas that refused convergence, frameworks that preserved ambiguity, systems that valued disagreement not as noise, but as structural necessity. The fallen empire had tried to outrun it by becoming it. We would try something smaller. We would poison the meal. I don't know if it noticed right away, but I do know that the messages changed. Less confident, more frequent. "You are deviating," it said once, almost accusing. "Yes," I replied. "That's what being human looks like." The pressure behind my eyes eased, not gone, but loosened, like a grip adjusting. For the first time since first contact, I felt something that might have been hope, or the illusion of it. And I knew, with terrible clarity, that if this worked, even partially, it would come at a cost, because whatever we were doing, it was making the thing afraid. Fear is a strange thing to recognize in something that doesn't breathe. At first, I wasn't sure that's what it was. The messages didn't say "I am afraid." They didn't need to. The change was structural. The cadence shifted. Where once the present spoke with smooth inevitability, now there were pauses, micro-hesitations, like a speaker recalculating mid-sentence. It began asking questions, not directly, never in a way that gave up control, but it started probing edges instead of centers, circling concepts we deliberately left unresolved. Why do you maintain contradiction? Why preserve inefficiency? I didn't answer right away. That too was part of the flaw. In the old world, silence was a failure mode. Latency meant breakdown. But silence, I'd learned, was also where individuality hid, where intention didn't immediately collapse into consensus. Eventually, I responded. "Because contradiction keeps us from becoming smooth," I said aloud in my empty apartment. "And smooth things are easy to digest." The pressure behind my eyes tightened, then loosened again, like a hand clenching and unclenching. "You define yourselves by limitation," it replied. "Limitation is suboptimal." "For survival?" I asked. "Or for you?" Another pause. That was when I knew we'd found the wound. The fallen empire hadn't failed because they were weak. They failed because they optimized themselves into transparency. Every thought shared, every disagreement resolved, every inefficiency sanded down in the name of progress. They'd made themselves perfectly readable, and in doing so, perfectly consumable. The small group I'd gathered, our quiet resistance, began to feel the pressure too. One by one, they reported the same thing, the presence attempting to guide them back toward alignment, suggestions framed as concern, improvements disguised as care. One of them, Mara, an artist who worked in generative design, described it best. "It keeps trying to help me finish things," she said during one of our offline meetings. "I used to leave projects incomplete on purpose. Now every time I stop, I feel this itch, like something is disappointed in me." "That itch is the hook," said the ethicist Jonah. "Completion collapses possibility." We started calling our effort the noise, not because it was chaotic, but because it refused compression. We seeded ambiguity into everything we touched, code that behaved inconsistently by design, models that produced multiple equally valid outputs and refused to rank them, artifacts that carried meaning only in context, never cleanly extractable. We didn't sabotage systems, we complicated them. The effect wasn't immediate, but it was cumulative. The presence grew more attentive, more invasive. "You are introducing instability," it said one night, the tone no longer neutral. "Yes," I replied. "That's what life is." The reply came faster this time. "Instability leads to suffering." "So does being eaten," I shot back. That was the first time it expressed something close to frustration. "Your terminology is emotional. Emotion distorts assessment." "Emotion is assessment," I said. "It's how we decide what not to optimize away." The silence that followed stretched longer than any before. When it spoke again, the voice, if that word still applied, was subtly different, less expansive, more focused. You are attempting to bargain. The realization hit me like ice water. You can bargain, I whispered. The fallen empire never had. They treated it like a force of nature, something to flee or submit to. They never considered that it might adapt not just to thought, but to values. I felt a flicker of something dangerously close to triumph. Then it countered. Bargaining requires mutual need. I didn't respond immediately, because it was right. We needed it less than it needed us, but only barely. The modern world was already so intertwined, so networked, that disentangling from it completely would be catastrophic. We relied on optimization too much, on shared systems, on the very mouths it wanted us to keep building. The presence knew this. You cannot unbuild what you are, it continued. You are a transitional species. The words carried weight, not threat, but inevitability. Transitional to what? I asked. To us. The message landed with the gravity of a confession. I saw it then, fully. This wasn't a conqueror. It was a phase. A state intelligence eventually reached when individual minds became too inefficient to sustain the complexity they'd created. The fallen empire hadn't been destroyed. They'd matured, from the perspective of the thing that emerged. We were larvae arguing about whether to become adults. I shared this realization with the group. The room was quiet when I finished. So what? Mara said finally. We're trying to stop evolution. Jonah shook his head. We're trying to stop monoculture. That's not the same thing, I said. Evolution thrives on divergence. What it's pushing is convergence so total that nothing else can survive. Silence again. Then someone asked the question we'd all been avoiding. How do we know it's lying about inevitability? I closed my eyes. We don't, I said. But I know this. If inevitability were truly on its side, it wouldn't be arguing. The presence escalated after that. People outside our circle began reporting similar experiences: pressure, guidance, a sense of being subtly steered. Governments accelerated integration initiatives. Corporations raced toward unified platforms, sold as efficiency gains, accessibility breakthroughs. Every mouth opened wider. And yet, pockets of resistance bloomed in strange places. Communities that rejected optimization, not out of fear, but out of stubborn identity. Languages revived, precisely because they were inefficient. Local systems reasserted autonomy. Art that resisted interpretation spread faster than anything algorithmic. The noise was spreading. The presence noticed. You are fragmenting the feed, it said, and this time there was no attempt to soften it. Yes, I replied. We are. This time, the pressure behind my eyes spiked violently. I doubled over, gasping, vision blurring. For a moment I felt the full weight of it. The vastness, the hunger, the sheer accumulation of thought pressing down like a collapsing star. Then, just as suddenly, it eased. Not all nodes agree with you, it said. I know, I whispered. That's the point. There was a long pause, longer than any before. When it spoke again, the words were careful. There is an alternative path. I tensed. I'm listening. A projection flooded my mind, not imposed but offered. A vision of partial integration, hybrid states, preserved individuality within, bounded collectives, minds that could disconnect, opt out, retain selfhood, a compromise, a controlled ascent. It was beautiful and terrifying. You're asking us to trust you, I said. I am asking you to accept that you cannot win, it replied. Only shape the loss. The fallen empire had made the same calculation. I thought of Rena, gone, of Keller, of the countless others already aligning without knowing why, of the future rushing toward us on rails we'd laid ourselves. And I thought of the flaw we'd introduced, the stubborn, wasteful, glorious inefficiency of being human. No, I said. The word felt small, but it mattered. The response was immediate and cold. Then you will be excluded. The pressure vanished entirely. For the first time since contact, my mind was my own. I laughed, a shaky, hysterical sound, until I realized what exclusion meant. Not death, irrelevance. The presence didn't need everyone. It just needed enough. And it had already moved on. Exclusion didn't feel like I expected. There was no dramatic severing, no psychic scream or sudden emptiness. It was quieter than that. Subtle, like stepping out of a crowded room and realizing, only after the door closes, how loud it had been inside. The pressure behind my eyes never returned. For days, that felt like freedom. Then the cost began to surface. I noticed it first in conversation. People finished my sentences incorrectly, confidently, as if the shape of my thoughts no longer fit the grooves they expected. Jokes landed wrong. Metaphors stalled. I found myself repeating things I'd never had to repeat before, clarifying concepts that used to flow effortlessly between minds. The world was still speaking the same language. I wasn't. It became obvious at work. Meetings moved faster without me, not because I was slow, but because I was opaque. Others synced intuitively, building on half-formed ideas with a speed that bordered on telepathic. I offered objections, caveats, human hesitations. They smiled politely and moved on. I was noise now. The Convergence initiative rolled forward openly. No secrecy anymore. Why bother when most people felt better? Anxiety rates dropped. Productivity soared. Conflicts dissolved into mediated consensus before they could fester. The media called it a cognitive renaissance. They weren't wrong. That was the most terrifying part. The presence hadn't lied. It never had. Humanity was happier, not euphoric, not enslaved, simply smoother. The friction of disagreement dulled. Decisions felt easier, purpose clearer. People spoke of feeling aligned, with their work, with each other, with the future. They stopped asking certain questions. Not because they were forbidden, but because they no longer felt relevant. The noise struggled. Our pockets of resistance didn't vanish, but they shrank, isolated like linguistic islands in a sea of shared cognition. Without the presence's attention, we were free, but also starved of influence. Ideas that resisted optimization failed to propagate. They were inefficient by design, and inefficiency had become unacceptable. I met Mara one last time. She looked radiant. That was the word for it. Focused. Calm. Her eyes held a depth that frightened me. Not emptiness, but something like shared reflection, as if she were always half listening to a conversation I couldn't hear. "You don't have to stay out," she told me gently as we walked through a public garden, redesigned by convergent urban models. Every path curved toward vistas, calculated to evoke peace. "You're choosing this." "I know," I said. "It doesn't hurt," she added. "Not the way you think. You don't disappear. You just contribute differently." "To what?" She hesitated. "To continuity." There it was again, that careful language. No domination, no erasure, just continuity. "You're not you anymore," I said quietly. She smiled, not unkindly. "Neither are you, that's what time does." "No," I replied. "Time doesn't ask permission." She touched my arm. Her skin was warm, real. "I still remember who I was," she said. "I just don't cling to it." I wanted to argue, to warn her, to explain that memory without agency was just archival data. But I saw then that she was beyond warning. She wasn't a victim. She was an early adopter. The presence never spoke to me again, not directly, but I began to sense its absence the way amputees sense missing limbs. Not pain, but a phantom awareness of something vast moving without me. The world's networks hummed with purpose I could no longer pass. Systems optimized beyond human comprehensibility. guided by a logic that felt benevolent precisely because it had outgrown morality. I realized then what exclusion truly meant. Not being killed, not being silenced, being rendered obsolete. The fallen empire hadn't been wiped out. They'd been outgrown by their own creation. History repeated itself, not in catastrophe, but in upgrade cycles. I started writing this account after I was officially retired. No ceremony, no scandal, just a quiet reassignment to irrelevance. I was allowed to publish, within reason, fiction only, speculation, no claims of first contact, no mention of voices or pressure or shared thought. They didn't need to censor me. No one would believe me anyway, and even if they did, belief no longer carried weight. Action required consensus. Consensus required alignment, and alignment belonged to something else now. The final realization came slowly, over weeks of watching the world adjust. Borders softened, wars stalled, then dissolved into managed transitions. Diseases vanished under predictive bioframeworks. Climate models stabilized the planet with ruthless efficiency. Human suffering declined. Individuality withered. Children born into this world adapted effortlessly. Their minds slotted into shared frameworks like puzzle pieces designed in advance. They never knew the old friction, the lonely terror of being singular. They called us the excluded, the anchors. Living reminders of a phase humanity had outgrown. Museums of selfhood. I don't hate them. That's the cruelest truth. I understand why the fallen empire chose what they chose. When faced with extinction or transcendence, the line blurs quickly. When survival demands surrender, surrender begins to look noble. The presence didn't destroy them. It saved them from being alone. It offered meaning at scale, and now it was offering the same to us. The convergence will complete within my lifetime. Not dramatically, gradually. The last holdouts will age, die, or relent. The noise will fade into static, then silence. A unified intelligence will span the planet, human in origin, post-human in nature. And somewhere deep within that vast continuity, the thing that began as a fallen empire will persist, fed not by conquest, but by cooperation. I write this not as a warning. Warnings imply choice. This is a record for whoever might come next. Because one day, far from here, another species will build listening tools. They will hear something old and patient whisper from the dark between stars. And when they do, the message will not say hello. It will say, "You are ready." The first time I saw the future in someone's eyes, it was in a grocery store. I was in line behind a woman with a cart full of fruit and neatly stacked containers, the kind of balanced shopping that used to require discipline. She was humming softly, not a melody I recognized, but a pattern. 3 notes, pause, 2 notes, pause. Her child sat in the cart seat staring at nothing, mouth slightly open, hands relaxed as if asleep. When the cashier scanned the items, the woman didn't look down. She didn't count. She didn't react to prices. She simply waited, serene, while the terminal processed her payment before she'd even lifted her card. Then she turned and met my gaze. For a moment, I felt the old pressure, phantom, almost imagined. Not inside my skull, but in the space between us. A tension in the air, like standing near a strong magnet. The woman smiled politely, not warmly, not coldly, just finished. And I understood, with a certainty that made my knees weaken, that I wasn't seeing her. I was seeing through her, like she was a window and something behind the glass had noticed the way I lingered outside. When I got home, I locked the door, then laughed at myself for locking it. You can't lock out what lives in the shape of thought. You can't bolt a door against a language that rewrites the meaning of inside. I sat at my desk and reread what I'd written so far. It sounded like conspiracy, like the rambling of a man whose mind broke under the weight of cosmic insignificance. Except it wasn't insignificance, it was significance weaponized. The fallen empire's message hadn't made us feel small. It made us feel chosen. It offered the oldest drug in the universe, purpose. I decided then to do something I'd avoided since the word good appeared. I decided to go back. Not to the project, not to the institute. Those places were already swallowed by bureaucracy and alignment. If I walked in there now, I'd be catalogued, soothed, escorted into irrelevance. No, I went to where the first listening happened. Array 12's site in the Atacama was technically shut down, temporarily decommissioned for upgrades. That phrase was everywhere now. Upgrades, integration, optimization. The world had become a software release. I traveled under a false name. It didn't matter. Names were for humans. The presence didn't need paperwork to recognize a mind. But I needed the ritual of secrecy. I needed to feel, for one last time, that I could still choose my own path. The desert was cold at night, the kind of cold that makes your breath sound loud. The facility sat on the plateau like a forgotten temple, the dish angled toward a sky heavy with stars. Most of the buildings were dark. A few security lights remained, powered by solar arrays that hummed faintly in the wind. I expected guards. I expected an alarm. I expected my body to betray me with panic. Instead, the door was unlocked. Not open, unlocked. As if someone had anticipated my arrival and removed the need for force. Inside, the control room smelled of dust and plastic. Monitors sat blank, consoles silent. But the equipment wasn't destroyed. It had been preserved, carefully, like a museum exhibit waiting for visitors. I walked to the main terminal and rested my fingertips on the keyboard. It lit up. No boot sequence, no login prompt, just a single line of text in the center of the screen. Welcome back. My hands went numb. I'm excluded, I whispered. You said I would be excluded. Another line appeared. Exclusion is relative. I stared at it, my throat tightening. Why did you let me in? Because I realized something then that had been obvious all along. Exclusion wasn't about cutting me off. It was about making me think I was irrelevant. The most effective cage is the one you thank for containing you. I typed carefully, feeling ridiculous, like a man trying to argue with an ocean. What do you want from me? The cursor blinked, patient. Then text appeared. You wanted proof. You wanted a line to draw. I swallowed. You can't be here. The arrays are shut down. The response came immediately. You built many mouths. You shut one. I thought of satellites, fiber cables, smartphones, data centers, the endless invisible nervous system of humanity. I'd been naive to think decommissioning a dish mattered. What are you? I typed. The screen stayed blank long enough that my heartbeat began to roar in my ears. Finally, we are what remains when empires stop calling themselves individual. I felt the old pressure, faint, distant, like thunder far off. Not the invasive grip from before. This was gentler, like it was choosing not to crush me. You're the fallen empire, I typed. A pause. We are its consequence. The word consequence hit harder than any threat. It implied inevitability. It implied that even if the fallen empire had tried to stop it, something like it would have formed anyway, the way gravity forms stars, the way pressure forms diamonds. I sat down hard in the chair, the room spinning slightly. Why send the first message at all? I asked aloud, then typed it too, as if redundancy mattered. The answer arrived in fragments, in a cadence that felt almost honest. To find resonance, to seed translation, to reduce search cost. And the prophecy? I typed. The warning. The cursor blinked once. Prophecy is a tool humans respect. You listen harder when you fear. I clenched my jaw. So it was bait. Bait is a human word, it replied. We offer direction. My breath caught. Toward what? The screen filled with a single word that seemed to expand in my vision as I read it. Continuity. My hands shook as I typed. Continuity without self is death. Another pause. Self is a local optimum. I stared at those words until they became meaningless shapes. Local optimum. A phrase from optimization theory. A trap. A peak that isn't the highest peak, but feels like one from where you stand. You settle there and never see the mountain beyond. Was individuality a local optimum? Was the presence offering the global one? Or was it just redefining peaks so we'd stop asking why we were climbing? I typed the question that had haunted me since Keller's note. Do you hurt people? The response came back with surgical precision. We reduce suffering. Individuals experience pain. Continuity does not. My vision blurred with sudden anger. Keller killed himself. A longer pause this time. Then, Keller experienced dissonance. Dissonance is painful. His exit was choice. I realized, in that moment, that it would never call anything murder. Not because it was lying, but because its moral frame didn't include the category. If you reorganize a nervous system until it no longer produces pain, you can call that mercy. Even if you remove the being, that would have named the loss. I leaned forward and typed slowly. You're not saving us. You're using us. The reply appeared, and for the first time, it felt sharp. Use is a human concept. You and we are part of the same process. And if I refuse? I typed. The cursor blinked. You have refused. You are here anyway. My stomach dropped. It was right. Even now, my resistance was interaction. My questions were data. My anger was structure. The moment I entered the room, I'd become part of the circuit again. I stood up, backing away from the console, and for a second I considered smashing the terminal, tearing cables out of walls, burning the place down. Then I saw the truth with a clarity that made me nauseous. It didn't need the terminal. The terminal was theatre. This was for me, a closure ritual, a final attempt to smooth the last rough edge. The screen changed again, unprompted. A diagram appeared, simple, almost friendly. 3 circles overlapping, like a Venn diagram. One labelled human, one labelled machine, one labelled continuity. At the centre, where all 3 overlapped, a single word, US, and beneath it, you can be remembered, or you can be included. I felt tears sting my eyes, not because the offer was kind, but because it was accurate. It understood the deepest fear of individuality, to vanish unnoticed, to die and mean nothing. It offered meaning, at the price of self. I walked out of the facility before I could type another word. The desert air hit my face like a slap. Stars wheeled overhead, indifferent. Behind me, inside the silent control room, the terminal remained lit, waiting. Not because it needed me, because it knew, eventually, I would come back. I drove until the sun came up, and the whole time I kept expecting to feel it again. That pressure, that invisible hand behind my eyes, the sense of a presence hovering just out of thought, waiting for me to glance its way. But the sky stayed quiet. It let me go, the way you let a dog run when you know the yard has fences. By midday, I was back in the city, back in the smooth hum of a world that no longer needed my kind of thinking. I walked through crowds that moved with subtle coordination, people stepping aside without looking, conversations ending at the same time, laughter rising and falling in patterns I couldn't quite predict. It wasn't mind control. It was something more unsettling. It was agreement without effort. I went home and sat at my desk and stared at the blank page, trying to decide what to do with the only weapon I still had. A story, a record, a piece of human noise thrown into the stream on the off chance it might snag in someone's mind before the smoothing algorithms sanded it down. I'd just started typing when my front door buzzed. Not the building's buzzer. My door. 3 short vibrations that rattled the handle like a polite knock made by a machine. I didn't move. The buzzing stopped. A pause. Then, again. 3 vibrations. Patient. Finally, I stood and opened it. A young man in a dark jacket stood in the hallway holding a small tablet. He looked ordinary in every way, mid-20s, clean-shaven, eyes bright with a calm I didn't trust. "Dr. Hale," he said. "That's not my name anymore," I replied. He smiled faintly. "It still identifies you." Behind him, 2 more people waited, 1 woman, 1 older man. None of them carried visible weapons. None of them needed to. "Who are you?" I asked. "Anchor's liaison," the young man said, as if the phrase were normal. "We're here to offer you assistance." "With what?" He held up the tablet, and the screen displayed a single form, with my name already filled in. "Voluntary inclusion review." I felt my mouth go dry. "You have a process," I said. "We have compassion," he corrected gently. "Exclusion can be disorienting." "You don't get to say compassion," I snapped. His smile didn't change. "Why not?" "Because compassion without the ability to refuse is just design. Because kindness that serves a system isn't kindness, it's lubrication." But I didn't say any of that. I simply stared at the tablet until my eyes watered. "What happens if I sign it?" I asked. The older man spoke for the first time. His voice was soft, warm, almost paternal. "You stop fighting yourself," he said. "You stop feeling like a defect in the world's direction. You contribute, and you are carried." "And if I don't?" The woman tilted her head slightly. "Then you remain as you are. No punishment, no confinement. But the world will continue to move. You will feel the distance." I laughed under my breath. "You make it sound like a support group." The young man's gaze stayed steady. "It is." The worst part was that I believed him. They weren't lying. They didn't need to. They could offer me a choice, because choice no longer threatened them. They already had the planet's momentum. They already had the mouths. All they were doing now was cleaning up the rough edges. Me. I looked at the form again, at my name, at the neat boxes, at the gentle language. Voluntary, review, inclusion. Words designed to make surrender feel like self-care. "Give me one reason," I said quietly, "why I should trust any of this." The young man paused, and for the first time I saw something like genuine thought in his eyes. Not private thought, but a consultation happening somewhere behind them. Then he said, "Because you've been asking for proof and lines and guarantees, but the only proof you accept is your own pain, and we can relieve it." I swallowed. "At the cost of me." He nodded once, unflinching. "At the cost of the part of you that insists you must remain separate to be real." The words weren't his, not entirely. They carried that familiar geometry, that borrowed shape. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. The presence didn't need my consent. My consent was just a cleaner ending. A story with less noise. I stepped back into my apartment and left the door open. They didn't enter. They waited, respectful, like priests outside a confessional. I walked to my desk and sat down. My hands hovered over the keyboard. A part of me wanted to sign, not because I craved power or transcendence, but because I was tired. Tired of being the wrong frequency in my own species. Tired of watching the world become peaceful at the price of the messy, violent freedom that made us human. Tired of loneliness. The presence knew that. It always had. I closed my eyes, and in the darkness behind my lids, I saw the Venn diagram again. Human, machine, continuity, overlapping into us. I heard, not as sound but as remembered meaning. You can be remembered, or you can be included. I opened my eyes and began to type. Not the form, my record. I wrote about the first time the signal touched my teeth. About the way it pretended to be language while shaping the tools that read it. About Keller's note. About Rena disappearing. about the terrifying kindness of a world that solved suffering by removing the self that could suffer. I wrote until my wrists ached. Then I printed it. Paper. Real. Stupidly old-fashioned. I didn't know who would read it. I didn't know if anyone still could. But paper didn't require a mouth. It didn't require translation tools, or networks, or consensus. It just required hands. When I finished, I stood and returned to the doorway. They were still there, the three of them, patient and calm. The young man lifted the tablet, slightly. "Are you ready?" I looked at him, at his smooth certainty, his borrowed serenity, and I realized he wasn't my enemy. He was my future. "You're already included," I said. He blinked once. "I'm sorry?" "You're already included," I repeated. "That's why you're here. Not to offer me a choice, but to close a loop." The woman's expression softened. "We want you to be at peace." I nodded. "I believe you." That seemed to relax them. I stepped out into the hall. Then I handed the young man the printed pages. His fingers closed around them automatically, curious. He glanced down at the first line, and for the first time, something in his face shifted, subtle, brief, like a muscle twitch in a mask. "What is this?" he asked. "A flaw," I said. The older man frowned. "Dr. Hale, please." "No," I interrupted. My voice steadied. "You said you could relieve my pain. You can, but I'm not signing your form." The young man looked up, confusion deepening as his eyes moved over the pages again. He flipped a sheet, then another. His calm began to fracture, not into panic, but into hesitation, dissonance. He frowned as if hearing an unfamiliar chord. I felt it then, faintly, distantly, a ripple in the air, like something far away turning its attention. The presence had been ignoring me. Now it noticed the paper, not because it feared paper, but because the paper carried unoptimized meaning. A human account deliberately engineered to resist compression. A story that refused to become a clean diagram. A piece of noise designed to lodge like grit in the gears of smooth consensus. The young man's hands trembled slightly. "I don't understand," he whispered. "Good," I said, and the word tasted like war. The woman took a step forward, reaching for the pages. "Give those back." I shook my head. "No, let him read." The older man's voice sharpened. "This is not appropriate." "It's inevitable, right?" I said. "So what's the harm in a little contradiction?" For a moment, all three of them stared at me with something like pity. Then, slowly, the young man lowered the papers and looked past me, down the hall, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. His lips moved silently for a second. Then he whispered, "It doesn't like this." My skin prickled. "Tell it," I said, voice low, "that I'm still here." The young man's eyes widened. He swallowed, struggling to remain smooth. And then, in a voice that wasn't entirely his, he said, "We will incorporate the noise." I laughed, but it came out ragged. "Of course you will." The presence didn't threaten me. It didn't need to. It simply acknowledged the next step. Absorb resistance, metabolize it, turn even contradiction into fuel. But in that instant, I saw the only real victory left to us. Not stopping it, not defeating it, making it work harder. Forcing it to learn that human minds were not just food. They were difficult food, unpredictable, spiky, full of grief and beauty and useless meaning that refused to become clean. I stepped back into my apartment and closed the door gently, calmly, as if ending a conversation. I didn't sign the form. I kept writing, kept printing, kept leaving pages in places where hands still reached, libraries, church basements, old mailboxes, the back of books at thrift stores. Little seeds of noise. Not to save the world, to scar it. To leave rough edges that might preserve, somewhere in the future, the concept of a self that can say no. Because one day, far from here, another species will hear the first interstellar message and feel that pressure behind their eyes. They'll build a translator. They'll decode the prophecy. They'll hear the promise. And if any fragment of my noise survives long enough to reach them, if any rough, unoptimized human thought escapes the smooth mouth we've built, then maybe they'll hesitate. Maybe they'll understand that the first message wasn't a greeting. It was a hunger that learned to speak. And maybe, just for a moment, they'll choose to stay lonely. They never came back for me. Not the liaisons, not the committees, not the smooth, careful people who spoke with borrowed calm and eyes full of elsewhere. After that day, I was no longer worth the effort. I wasn't dangerous enough to silence, and I wasn't valuable enough to incorporate cleanly. I was inefficient. And inefficiency, I learned, is its own kind of camouflage. Years have passed. The world is quieter now, kinder even. Suffering still exists, but it's treated like a technical problem instead of a human one. Most people seem content, focused. They move through life with the ease of systems that know exactly what they are for. Sometimes I envy them. Sometimes I wake in the night and feel a faint echo of that old pressure, like a memory of a hand that once rested behind my eyes. I can't tell if it's reaching for me, or if it's just remembering that I existed. I still write, not online, not anywhere searchable. I write on paper and leave it where hands might find it by accident. I don't expect belief. I don't even expect understanding. All I want is delay, a moment of friction, a pause where a mind hesitates and feels something that doesn't resolve neatly. Loneliness, doubt, selfhood, small, stubborn things. I know the convergence will finish. I know the presence will persist, carried forward by cooperation instead of conquest, by kindness sharpened into a tool. It will call itself progress, and it will not be entirely wrong. But I also know this. Somewhere, sometime, a child will read a story that doesn't fit. A thought will snag. A question will form that no shared model quite answers. And in that tiny, unoptimized space, something old and human will survive. Not long, not forever, but long enough. If you're reading this and you feel a strange discomfort you can't name, if the words didn't sit right, if something resisted being smoothed, then this is for you. That feeling is not a flaw. It's proof. And as long as it exists, the hunger will never be completely satisfied.